So, a new vessel was introduced in the trailer for Star Trek Starfleet Academy, and I'm not talking about the training vessel, the USS Athena, which reminds me of a garden ship from Final Fantasy VIII. I'm talking about the Klingon vessel, the Qehpu Class. This ship is drawn from the lore and timeline of Star Trek Online, which is set in the early 25th century. So if it does indeed appear in the 32nd century of the Academy setting, then there is going to be some revision to its introduction. That being said, I can still cover its lore of the online version, as its function and form likely translate. We'll see what happens in a year or so, but I imagine it's nothing more than a background ship when it comes to canon. Either way, let's break down this class. It was designed for Star Trek Online's Escalation Update in 2017 by Hector Ortiz and modelled by Ian Richards. It released alongside the also now canon Reliant class, and a Romulan variation to fill the role of a midway point between a battlecruiser and a nimble escort. As such, it blends the design styles of things like the Voyager with the silhouette of a bird of prey. We can see things like the grills and neck of the Burrell class in its design. So, to its STO lore and origin now. The class was developed at the tail end of the Dominion War, while Starfleet was creating things like the Odyssey and Lamar class in the lead up to the Romulan supernova. The Klingon Empire was getting to work on updating its fleet, the Dominion War revealing that while Starfleet were allies of the Empire, their priority in development and innovation risked outpacing the Klingons. One thing that became clear during those skirmishes was a hole in the Klingon armada. They excelled at creating battleships, with the Nechva and Voyager class ships manning the front lines of the war alongside some other classes. And they are of course most famous for their smaller, nimble hunters, like the Bird of Prey line. Take your pick at the version. But they lacked something in between. The Qehpu was envisioned to fill that role, as a lighter battleship, where they could pour their wartime developments and insights into forming a more manoeuvrable vessel that could still hold the line as well as any battlecruiser. As a side note, it's always fun talking about the Klingon ships compared to Starfleet. They're all like, it's not primarily a battleship, but we do have it run patrol and defensive blah blah blah. They're tiptoeing around designations like warship. Klingons are just earnestly going, it explodes things! To begin with, they took much of what their most advanced warship had. The Nechva using its bridge module and advanced systems as the nerves of this new beast. They then folded in design lessons from the Voyager class, which itself was developed with lessons learned from Starfleet. Along the development process, the focus was on maintaining its flight capabilities, keeping it as close to a bird of prey as possible for its mass. Prioritising less but more efficient weaponry struck a balance between firepower and energy demands, and after a few years, the Qehpu entered service around the early 2390s, one of which was under the command of Captain Corrin, daughter of Grilka, by 2395. At the turn of the century, the Klingon Empire had been facing rising tensions with Starfleet in the face of rising Gorn threats and the Federation's condemnation of the Klingon response. This would ultimately lead them into another war with the UFP, ending in 2409, where the class was still in service. The ship managed to fulfill its designed role perfectly, being on the more nimble side of the battlecruiser line, while retaining the hardiness of their larger battleships. This earned the class the designation of an advanced light battlecruiser, where it excelled as a strike vessel for fast attacks into enemy territory or fleets. It was armed with two Mark X dual disruptor cannons, which protruded from under the vessel's wings prominently. This was because, in keeping with the ship as conservative in scale as possible, the cannons were simply there and exposed, like a bird of prey, rather than dedicated deck space to fire control rooms. The same was true for the two 4 disruptor cannons under the bridge. Accompanying these main cannons, there are 4 more disruptor points, 2 on top and 2 under at the rear and 4 for coverage. There's also one forwards photon torpedo launcher on the belly of the ship and 2 rear-facing photon torpedo launchers at a single point. There are also 2 more placements on the wings, but I'm unsure if these are launchers or not. What the hell, it's Klingon, let's count them. As most Klingon ships, it could be fitted with a cloaking device with the same restrictions that had plagued Klingon cloaks forever. Don't fire when cloaked, no shielding, and so on. In terms of a warp core, it was nothing special. It featured a top-of-the-line but otherwise unremarkable Mark 10 warp reactor that allowed it to reach warp 9.9. So, as mentioned, much of the focus was on keeping it agile at impulse speeds, and for the most part it was a success. It had 1 main impulse drive and 2 additional on the wings for manoeuvres. This allowed it to perform some evasive feats that were otherwise limited to smaller craft. On the underside, we can see the extensive heating dissipators for this main drive. Part of its success was the potential energy entangler, which was an innovation allowing for incoming energy weapons to have part of their output captured on impact of the shields and converted into a usable power for immediate consumption. Therefore, it was channeled into the impulse engines, granting temporary boosts to this speed and turn rate. In essence, the more you fired at it, the faster and more slippery it got. The hull had many layers of protection. Beginning with the standard hull armour, there was also a layer of enhanced radiation and energy dissipation plating, and then a layer of absorptive plating, which dispersed kinetic impacts across the hull. This all added up to make a very durable ship, even if the shields failed, or more likely, if the ship was cloaked. Just imagine how much more manoeuvrable and speedy it would be if they shed this. But no, you kind of need the armour. The level of design and effort that went into this class created a hell of a skirmisher, something that the Klingon Empire certainly favoured. This new, smarter hybrid not only could take the hits, but would become increasingly difficult to pin down the more strikes it took, all the while unleashing a pretty heavy amount of firepower. It was too dangerous to ignore, and when you did catch it, it shook it off and carried on. Klingons can be traditionalists and stuck in their ways, but things like the Qehpu show why branching out occasionally yields greater results. For nigh on 20 years, this vessel struck out to claim victories for the Empire and unlocked a slew of new tactical operations that they could undertake, as quick strikes no longer required sending in fragile cloaked birds of prey. Now you could send something that would survive. Thanks for watching this breakdown on the lore of the Qehpu Class. I expect none of this to make it into the shows, but it's the lore and intention behind its design. So, thanks for watching, I've been Rick, and until the next one, goodbye.